The dawn of October 1st, 331 BCE, marked the moments leading to one of the greatest confrontations of antiquity, the Battle of Gaugamela. Beneath the open skies of a forgotten plain in Mesopotamia, Alexander the Great and Darius III positioned their armies for a clash that would determine the fate of entire civilizations. On one side stood Alexander, the young king of Macedon, already celebrated as a brilliant and charismatic commander. He led a disciplined army, shaped by the rigidity of phalanxes and the precision of Greek tactics. His eyes shone with the determination of a conqueror who knew no limits, driven not only by the desire to defeat his enemy, but to immortalize his name. On the other side was Darius III, the last great ruler of the vast Achaemenid Empire, staking everything on a desperate attempt to save his dynasty. His enormous army gathered soldiers from all corners of his realm: Babylonian archers, Median horsemen, Indian war elephants, and even scythed chariots designed to tear through enemy formations. Darius believed that the strength of his position and his numerical superiority could finally subdue the audacious Macedonian general. This battle would not be merely a contest of strength or numbers. Gaugamela represented the clash of two worlds: the Macedonian West, defined by boldness and innovation, and the Persian East, upheld by millennia of tradition. More than that, it was a confrontation between two leaders with opposing visions of the world: Alexander, driven by ambition and glory, and Darius, fighting to preserve a vast and diverse empire. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting light upon the battlefield, the two armies made their final preparations. Alexander knew he faced an immense adversary, but placed his trust in the loyalty of his men and the superiority of his tactics. Darius, on the other hand, watched anxiously, aware that this might be his last chance to safeguard his dynasty's legacy. Little did the combatants know that by the end of that day, the fate of an empire would be sealed, and the ancient world would never be the same again. The journey to Gaugamela began long before the armies gathered. The confrontation was the culmination of a campaign meticulously planned by Alexander and desperately contested by Darius. To understand the battle, one must delve into the events that preceded it. Following his victory at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander delivered the first serious blow to the Achaemenid Empire. Darius, defeated, saw his military force scattered and his political standing shaken. Yet, the Persian king still controlled his vast empire, a resource he believed sufficient to halt the advance of the young Macedonian. As Alexander advanced through the eastern Mediterranean, Darius made frantic attempts at negotiation. In an exchange of messages that revealed the stark contrast between the two leaders, Darius offered lands, wealth, and even the hand of his daughter in marriage, in hopes of appeasing Alexander's ambition. Alexander's reply, delivered on a carefully written scroll, was direct and cutting. "You do not offer what already belongs to the victor. I do not accept lands I have already conquered, nor wealth I have already seized. As for your daughter, keep her. The world you rule will soon be mine." Darius was furious upon reading those words, but knew he needed time. He gathered soldiers from every corner of his empire, forming an army as diverse as it was vast. Meanwhile, Alexander continued his march, dismantling Persian strongholds in Tyre and Gaza before heading to Egypt, where the oracle of Siwa proclaimed him son of Amun. This elevated the morale of his troops and further solidified his authority. Pressure mounted for Darius, who now saw Alexander not only as a military enemy, but as a symbol of a new era. On the other hand, Alexander viewed Darius not merely as an adversary, but as a personal obstacle to achieving total dominion. The letters they exchanged were laden with subtext, a duel of words and wills foreshadowing the imminent battle. As Alexander advanced with precision, each victory reinforced his image as an invincible leader. To the Macedonians, he was not just a king, but a divine hero. In contrast, Darius faced internal doubts within his empire. His defeat at Issus had shaken his legitimacy, and whispers of treachery already echoed within his court. Out of time and with preparations complete, Darius resolved to confront Alexander head-on. Gaugamela, a vast plain in Mesopotamia, was the chosen site. Darius selected the location carefully, leveling the ground to favor his heavy cavalry and scythed chariots. This was a strategic move that demonstrated both his experience and his need to secure any possible advantage against such an unpredictable opponent. As the Persian army assembled on the plain of Gaugamela, Alexander continued to defy expectations. He did not march directly to the battlefield as Darius had anticipated. Instead, his unexpected maneuver across the Tigris River revealed an audacious strategy aimed at wearing down the enemy before the confrontation even began. Alexander was not merely fighting an army, he was challenging the very logic of conventional warfare. This movement marked the beginning of a series of tactical decisions that would culminate in the greatest victory of his career. With the stage set, the armies moved like pieces on a colossal chessboard, converging toward the final confrontation. The first autumn winds swept across Mesopotamia as the two greatest armies of the ancient world advanced toward what would become the climax of a campaign marked by swift victories and audacious decisions. Both Alexander and Darius understood that this confrontation would not merely be a battle of men, but a duel of strategies, a struggle for legacy. Darius III, wielding the full might of the vast Achaemenid Empire, knew he could not afford to fail. His forces, gathered from regions as far-flung as Egypt, India, and Central Asia, presented an awe-inspiring spectacle. The Persian army was not just large, it was a mosaic of the cultural and military diversity of a millennia-old empire. Chariots fitted with sharp blades on their wheels were deployed to break through the feared Macedonian phalanx. War elephants, symbols of untamable power, were brought from the east to strike terror into the hearts of Alexander's soldiers. Additionally, Darius had carefully chosen the field of Gaugamela, a wide, open plain that favored his numerical superiority and the mobility of his chariots. To secure further advantage, Darius ordered the terrain leveled, removing any obstacles that might hinder his formations. He placed great confidence in his numbers and the structure of his army, yet deep down, he bore the scars of his defeat at Issus and understood that Alexander was an opponent unlike any other. Meanwhile, Alexander was orchestrating something far more intricate. He rejected the notion of a conventional battle where brute force would prevail. His movements were precise and unpredictable, designed to unnerve the enemy before the first blow was struck. Marching deliberately slowly, Alexander crossed the Tigris River at an unexpected point, avoiding early skirmishes that could deplete his forces. The strength of his army lay in the discipline of his phalanxes, the unwavering loyalty of his men, and his unmatched ability to adapt tactically. To Alexander, the battlefield was a chessboard. Each move was studied, each piece positioned for the decisive moment. His ability to turn even disadvantages into opportunities set him apart as a commander of extraordinary vision. While the Persians had overwhelming numbers, Alexander possessed something Darius could not replicate: the absolute loyalty of his troops. He rode among their ranks, personally encouraging his soldiers. They saw in him a leader who shared their risks and celebrated their victories as his own. In contrast, Darius commanded from a distance, positioned securely at the center of his ranks. His role as commander was more ceremonial than practical, and whispers of betrayal within his court reflected the internal tensions of his vast empire. Many of his commanders fought out of obligation, like nobles summoned by their king to a war they did not wish to wage. At last, the two armies converged on the plain of Gaugamela. Alexander ordered his men to rest on the eve of the battle while he meticulously studied the terrain. Days earlier, he had captured Persian spies, interrogating them to uncover the disposition and numbers of Darius's forces. "They have the numbers, but we have the heart and the mind," Alexander remarked to his generals at the conclusion of a tactical meeting. His confidence was unshaken, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Darius, on the other hand, spent the night in restless anxiety. Reports reached him that Alexander had rejected his latest peace offer. Another letter was sent, this time filled with veiled threats, but the silence that followed only deepened his unease. With the armies positioned and the field prepared, the day of battle finally arrived. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the vast expanse of the Gaugamela plain, revealing the sheer magnitude of the forces assembled. The field of Gaugamela, leveled by Persian engineering, seemed ideal for Darius's plans. At the heart of his army, he positioned his scythed chariots, ready to carve deadly gaps in the Macedonian formations. Flanking these chariots stood Median and Persian cavalry, while the rear lines held light infantry and archers. The war elephants, symbols of Eastern power, were strategically placed to intimidate and disrupt the enemy troops. Alexander, on the other hand, arranged his forces differently. At the center was his disciplined and impenetrable Macedonian phalanx. To the right, he positioned his elite cavalry, led by himself, while the left flank consisted of light troops and allied contingents. Behind the first line, a secondary formation of hoplites stood ready to reinforce the center or respond to potential flanking maneuvers. Alexander embraced a fluid strategy, enabling his troops to react swiftly to Persian maneuvers. His numerical disadvantage was considerable, but he relied on the technical superiority of his army and the unshakable morale of his men. In the days leading up to the battle, Alexander captured Persian spies who were scouting his movements. Rather than executing them, he fed them, showed them the strength and discipline of his army, and released them to deliver a clear message of confidence to Darius. This psychological gambit was intended to sow doubt in the Persian king's mind. Meanwhile, Darius sent messages to Alexander, attempting to destabilize his focus. His words fluctuated between threats and pleas, promising peace if Alexander withdrew and destruction if he continued. Alexander ignored these communications or responded with curt and pointed remarks, such as, "My march will end only at the throne you will abandon." On the morning of the battle, Alexander gathered his commanders around him. He rode among his ranks, addressing his soldiers and meeting their eyes. "You are not just soldiers, you are my companions. My brothers, many of you have marched with me since Pella, others joined us at Issus. Today we fight not for land, but for the future. We are few, but we are better. They have numbers, we have each other. Fight as you always have, and the world will be ours." On the opposite side of the field, Darius also addressed his troops. He was acutely aware that his position as commander was under scrutiny, especially after his defeat at Issus. Though he sought to inspire confidence, his speech betrayed more anxiety than leadership. "The enemy we face is bold but foolish. You are the sons of the greatest empire the world has ever known. Remember, this is our land, our families, our empire. Defeat the invader, and your names will be immortalized alongside the heroes of our past." With orders given and formations adjusted, Alexander initiated an oblique movement, advancing slightly to the right. This seemingly innocuous maneuver was a stratagem designed to draw the Persian army away from the leveled ground where the scythed chariots would be most effective. Darius, noticing the movement, ordered his troops to adjust their formations. He knew Alexander was unpredictable, but could not allow the young king to seize the initiative. The tension mounted with each step the troops took as the midday sun began to warm the battlefield. As the armies closed in, the silence gave way to the growing sounds of footsteps, clashing weapons, and war cries. The decisive moment had arrived. Darius ordered his scythed chariots to attack first, hoping they would shatter the Macedonian central line. The iron wheels spun furiously, their blades gleaming under the sun. The sight was terrifying, and the roar of the chariots grew louder with each passing moment. But Alexander was prepared. Anticipating the attack, he commanded his phalanxes to create carefully planned corridors. Like a tide parting around rocks, the Macedonian soldiers opened precise gaps, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through. Isolated and vulnerable, the chariots were quickly surrounded and destroyed by light infantry. Darius's first move, in which he had placed so much confidence, had failed, but the battle was far from over. As the chariots were neutralized, Darius launched a massive frontal assault. His infantry advanced en masse, while archers and slingers rained projectiles upon the Macedonian lines. Yet the phalanx held firm. The soldiers, wielding their spears like a living wall, advanced slowly and inexorably against the enemy. The Macedonian center wavered under the pressure, but did not break. Alexander, having strategically positioned hoplites as reinforcements, sent a portion of them to stabilize the central line. Meanwhile, Darius, observing the limited progress of his forces, began shifting his reserves to the right, planning a flanking maneuver that could decide the battle. But Alexander already had a counter-strategy in motion. On the right flank, Alexander led his elite cavalry, the hetairoi, the core of his strategy. With precision, he advanced obliquely, stretching his forces to draw more Persian troops away from the center. The maneuver bewildered Darius, who started redistributing his forces to confront the new attack. At the critical moment, Alexander made his boldest move. He regrouped his cavalry and, personally leading the charge, directed them straight at the Persian center where Darius was positioned. The combination of speed, force, and precision was devastating. The Persian center began to crumble as the Macedonian cavalry broke through enemy lines. Seeing Alexander dangerously close, Darius panicked. For a brief moment he hesitated, but as he watched his lines collapse, he chose to abandon the field. Mounting his chariot, he fled to save his life, leaving his army leaderless. The Persian king's flight had an immediate effect. Without their leader, the Persian army began to disintegrate. Troops still engaged elsewhere on the battlefield realized the battle was lost and started to retreat. The once vast and imposing Persian army was now a chaotic mass of men in flight. Sensing the disorder, Alexander ordered an unrelenting pursuit. His cavalry advanced, cutting down fleeing soldiers and ensuring the enemy could not regroup. Yet even in victory, he maintained control. When it became clear the field was secure, Alexander regrouped his forces and halted the chase. The field of Gaugamela, once a meticulously prepared stage of expectation, was now littered with bodies, blood, and debris. The victory was absolute, and Alexander, though exhausted, knew he had achieved something far greater than territorial conquest. He had sealed the fate of an empire. As the sun began to set over the plain of Gaugamela, Alexander rode across the battlefield, surveying the outcome of his triumph. His mind was already fixed on the future. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis were now within his grasp, and the Persian Empire, which had endured for centuries, was now but a shadow of its former self. The Battle of Gaugamela was a watershed moment, shaping the course of history for centuries to come. Alexander's strategic brilliance, combined with his charismatic leadership, ensured that he not only defeated the greatest empire of his time, but also left a legacy that would echo through the ages. But this was only one step in his journey. Alexander did not stop at Gaugamela. He continued to push the boundaries of his empire, carrying his vision of a universal dominion to new horizons. Curious about how Alexander further shaped the ancient world and the impact of his conquests on global history, join us as we explore the next chapters in the saga of Alexander the Great.